Welcome. Maybe instead of waiting for the world to change, we need to start changing the world. And so how do we do that? By first working on ourselves and changing ourselves. So that leads me into my talk today. I'm going to take off my glasses. So good morning. My name is Jeff Jackson. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living. I know many of you, most of you. For those that I don't, welcome. Nice to see you. When Sharon first asked me if I'd like to do the talk today, of course I was excited, and then I was nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? How do I make this worthwhile? How do I make it something that you guys will have a takeaway? And I decided, well, let's not be nervous. Let's just step into it and make it fun, make it exciting, make it something that you'll learn and take away. So here we go. Excited is how I decided I wanted to be today, even though I'm nervous as heck. So. We've been looking at Pema Chodron's books this month, and one that I read for today was Welcoming the Unwelcome. It's her latest book. If you haven't read it, it's very good. And so I'm just showing you that's what it looks like. Pema Chodron is a Tibetan Buddhist and ordained nun. She's the author of several dozen books in her lifetime. A central theme of her teaching has been the principles of Shenpa, or attachment, which she interprets as the moment one is hooked into the cycle of habitual, negative, or self-destructive thoughts and actions. This occurs when something in the present moment stimulates a memory from the past, a past experience. I've certainly found this to be true to myself, and I've also found this to be true for a lot of my clients. We just did a class on the Enneagram this year here at the Center for Spiritual Living, and this concept of past experiences is driving today's, the topic of past experiences driving today's behavior came up in our class. It came up as the idea of the lost childhood message. And so, for example, of the lost childhood message, if we talk about the Enneagram, let's look at the 8 on the Enneagram. The 8 is the challenger, and the challenger's lost message, is this like giving you guys feedback? Hold on a second. Switch to the microphone. Is that a little bit better? Yeah. So again, the 8, or the challenger, their lost message was that you will not be betrayed, meaning that's not what they heard. They didn't hear you wouldn't be betrayed. So it was their lost message. And since they did not receive this message, they interpret the world as saying that it is not okay to be vulnerable or to trust anyone. If you look at the 9 on the Enneagram, or the peacemaker, their lost message was that your presence matters, and therefore it's not okay to assert yourself. The type 2 in the Enneagram is the helper. And the helper didn't hear that you're wanted, and therefore they see the world only thinks that you're good or okay if you love them. You need love from others. It's an external focus. So this lost message will come into play in a few minutes. I titled my talk today, Finding Joy in the Driver's Seat. So, what driver's seat am I talking about? Of course, I'm using the driver's seat as a metaphor for self-awareness, self-actualization, and self-mastery.
What if you're just a race car?
You're good. Okay. We'll get to that too. Because one of my questions is, what do you see yourself driving? So yours is a race car. Remember that. 68 Chevy Chevelle. Okay, we'll come back to that. We talk a lot about self-awareness and science of mind, the concept that spirit is within us and the power of our minds and our self-talk and how important our self-talk is. So finding joy in the driver's seat, what do I mean by this? What I mean is, what voice do I hear in my head? What part is making the decisions right now? Is it the wounded part of myself? Is that part of me who did not hear what I needed to hear as a child? That I am safe, that I am good enough, that I need others to love me? Or is it that self-awareness and masterful me? It's in the driver's seat. Being in the driver's seat can take a bit of work, as I'm sure you guys all know, since we're all here at the Center for Spiritual Living. really the work is getting into the driver's seat rather than being in the driver's seat. I think we've learned that in our journey as well. We have to learn the rules of the road if we're getting in the driver's seat. We have to learn how the vehicle operates. We might even take driver's education. We need to find out, are we driving a standard transmission or an automatic? And of course, the younger kids wouldn't even know what that meant, but we all know what that means. Most of us were so excited to get behind the wheel for the first times. We might have been a little nervous, but we were excited. It meant we were going to have some freedom in our lives. So in life, we're rolling along, whether we're in the driver's seat or not. If we're not in the driver's seat, who is? As I'm sure that you've noticed in your life, sometimes people never find the driver's seat. It can seem easier to simply move through life and take what comes. Self-awareness and self-actualization can take a little time and a lot of consciousness, a lot of decisions and a lot of action. When I talk about not being in the driver's seat, I'm talking about someone else being in the driver's seat. Who? If we're not in our driver's seat, who's driving it? Who's the driver? For me, I would call it parts of us. I believe that we're all made up of parts, lots of parts. Where do these parts come from? They come from experiences that we've had in life, both positive and experiences that maybe had some opportunities for us to learn from, or the negative ones. We can give a name to our parts. Your part might be Johnny, might be Sally, Michael, or your part could be the inner critic. Your part could be the helper, the saboteur. Either way, when one of these parts is in the driver's seat, we're not. And when we're not in the driver's seat, we've been hijacked. Any of you ever feel that feeling of you're being hijacked? Don't know who's driving? It's like, oh my gosh. Well, I personally have a part that I call the lion, king of the jungle. He's the ruler of all. He's definitely my inner critic. And for those of you who took the Enneagram class with me, you'll know that I identify as a 1 in the Enneagram. Ones have a loud inner voice and a loud inner critic. Mine is called the lion. I found that lion to spend a lot of time in my driver's seat. Not anymore, but he sure used to. So what's the lion driving? What are you driving? You're driving your souped up car.
My muscle car.
Muscle car. When I talk about driving, did a vision come up to any of you for what you're driving? No, for me, it's a bus. It's like a school bus. And for you, it could be a plane, a boat, a car, a train. It could be anything. It could be a bicycle. It could be a souped up hot rod.
Yes, yeah, I want to be a stunt driver.
So are you driving? If you had just a vision for a second of a school bus or a boat or a souped up hot rod, were you in the driver's seat or were you watching someone else drive? Just a quick show of hand. Who was watching someone else drive? Okay. How many of you saw yourself in the driver's seat? Okay. Thank you. Bodhicitta is something Buddhists strive for. The word means awakening the heart. And in awakening the heart, we increase the odds of spending more time in the driver's seat. As we awaken our heart, it can be helpful to know who's riding along with us on the bus. When I first mentioned driving the bus, was there anyone on the bus with you? Look around. Who do you see? Is it just you or are there other passengers? Rhetorical question. There are times when I've had an entire busload of unruly kids. I call them the screaming Mimis, all vying for attention. You know the ones. Other times it's a busload of quiet, meditating passengers, and I've seen everything in between. My busload tells me something about what's going on in my life. The nuances of who's on the bus gives me some great insight, especially if I take some quiet moments to pay attention to who's on the bus with me. And there are times when I notice that someone else is driving the bus. I might be sitting in a seat somewhere else on the bus, riding along, unaware of the road, unaware of the specifics of the trip. I remember when I first had this feeling, it seemed just fine. I was comfortable being the passenger. Are you a passenger or are you the driver? Getting in the driver's seat is like integrating our lives. When we integrate and heal our past experiences and come from a place of wholeness, it's easier to stay in the driver's seat. What does it mean when someone else is driving? How did they get in the driver's seat in the first place? Well, we might have let them in the driver's seat, or they might have hijacked the way in the driver's seat. So we're hijacked. That part of us literally pushes us out of the driver's seat and takes the reins. That part has hijacked the bus because they feel like they could do a better job driving than we can in the moment, which is often the case. So they're really there to serve us. They have a positive intention. But they noticed that I wasn't the best driver at the time and felt that they could do better. Maybe they felt that they needed to protect me. When we are not in the driver's seat is when we often spread our karmic seeds. There's a saying in Buddhism that you want to see where you're going, take a look at what you're doing now. What we're doing today is planting the seeds for tomorrow. In my life coaching practice, I use a continuum to describe the components of our journey. On the left-hand side is the victimhood. In the center is the warrior. And on the right-hand side is self-mastery. Our come from is usually in one of these ways of beings: victim, warrior, self-master. The movement is not always linear through these stages, and it's not a one-way street. We move back and forth and travel between these different ways of being. It's basically a filter that we use to see the world and see the events in our lives. You all know what that feels like. You know, if you're being the victim, it might be, so-and-so did such and such to me. Or can you believe what she or he ... We feel helpless. We're in the victim role because we are sure that we've been done wrong. This stage of development is driven by polarization. We're separate from one another, separate from the earth, separate from God. Pema Chodron talks about this in her book, Welcoming the Unwelcome. Simple words and thoughts like me, them, they, you, unworthy, worthy, wrong, right. When we're in the victim stance, our perceptions are based on seeing ourselves as separate from, as opposed to being integrated and part of. We see this in politics. We see it in religions. We see it in nations. It starts as an inside job, though. If we want to, like the song said, waiting for a world to change, then we need to step in and change the world. And we do that one step at a time through ourselves. It's an inside job. So we have the opportunity when we notice this to take a moment, to take a breath and ask ourselves, are we all connected? Are we part of the whole? The simple act of noticing can be where the greatest integration happens, when we just notice. Then we have the warrior, that middle ground. Once we've spent some time in the victim land, sometimes we might decide that we want to learn to do better. She won't do that to me again. Or, I need to learn how to hold a boundary. Or, the next time she does such and such, I'm going to let her have it. And I'm going to tell everyone about it. So when we're the warrior, we've learned enough to know that somehow we've been victimized. We've learned some solutions, maybe boundary setting is a solution, and we scream it from the highest platform, right? I mean, you see that out there in the world. And this is the warrior stance. They're out to make a point. I'm going to speak up when I see someone else being victimized. I'm going to share with them what I have learned about boundaries. It doesn't matter that they have invited my opinion or not. This is really a disservice to the person. When we interrupt someone's journey by being the warrior, we have uninvitedly disturbed their journey and taken away their opportunity for self-growth and learning. So when we step in as the warrior, we're removing their opportunity to learn the lesson that they were intended to learn. The warrior is usually self-righteous and well-meaning, and is now in the driver's seat when you're the warrior. When you're the warrior, they're in the driver's seat, taking names and forging forward with a lot of ego. So there's a lot of ego involved in that middle warrior ground. Finally, there's the master or self-mastery. The master holds boundaries without emotion. There is a lack of ego. It simply is. There's no judgment. The master knows that we're all connected. Self-mastery is a way of being. It's our core true self. I call my masterful part Jeff. It's just me. Awareness of what we're doing. We feel integrated, strong, self-aware, connected to source. And the seeds that we are sowing, we're aware of. We can see the consequences of our actions. Pema Chodron talks about practice of adding just like me to an observation, mainly to like a judgmental observation, let's say. So this reminds her that we all feel the same way at times. We have all been triggered, all been the warrior, and all know what mastery feels like. For example, you're watching someone who's been triggered. You might say to yourself, they've been triggered, just like me. Or you may have a friend who's looking for connection and intimacy, but maybe in all the wrong places. So you'll say they're looking for connection and intimacy, just like me. And so her adding the just like me to the end of a judgment statement reminds her that we are all one, we're all connected, we all share the same, feelings and all want to be connected and belong. So, hint, when you're in self-mastery, you're going to find that the ego doesn't like it because the ego wants to be loud, right? So be prepared. The ego is going to fight back. Be ready. Be aware. Getting back in the driver's seat. Is Jeff always in the driver's seat? Nope. He's definitely not. But when I recognize that I'm not in the driver's seat, I do my best to see things with a child's mind, with openness, questioning, with inquisitiveness. I would ask, who's in the driver's seat right now? And usually, I just sit back, and then I find myself slipping back into the driver's seat. It's just the act of noticing that I'm not in the driver's seat that allows me to get back in the driver's seat. And this doesn't just happen once, it happens a million times. It's not a one and done. So there are times when the hijacker doesn't want to relinquish the driver's seat. Now what? Sometimes you have to use your parenting skills. It might be like a young child driving the bus. And so that part who needs guidance to relinquish the seat. Sometimes it's the unruly teenager, right? Are they going to listen to guidance and parental opinion? Heck no, they need a jab in the ribs, right? You just say, get out of the driver's seat. So you have to know who's in the driver's seat, and you want to make sure that your response to get them out of the driver's seat is appropriate to who's in the driver's seat, to who that part is. And again, the noticing that you're not in the driver's seat, to me, is where the change can take place. So when I hop back in the driver's seat after being hijacked by a part, do I think, oh, it's all handled now, and now that part will never hijack the bus again? No. I can guarantee you that the seat will be hijacked a million times. It's like when you're teaching manners to your kids. No elbows on the table. Use your napkin. Please and thank yous. Don't drink and drive. Don't do drugs. Do you say it once? Do you say it 100 times? You say it 1,000 times. Same with us. It's not a one and done. And it's one thing I notice in my practice with my clients. Sometimes they'll get frustrated because we've done the work, and then it comes up again and again and again and again. And so it's letting them know that that's normal, that's a normal part of the process of integrating, is to go through it a million times, not a one and done. So is there joy in the driver's seat? I say yes. And for me, the joy comes from the transition point from warrior to mastery. And strangely, it's like the lack of ego in self-mastery gives me that sense of calmness. And as a 1 on the Enneagram, calmness is what I'm looking for. And so that's what gives me the joy of being in the driver's seat. But it's going to be different for each of us and each of you. That feeling that you get in the driver's seat is different for everybody. But notice that feeling, and that's what you're looking for. Being in the driver's seat starts with self-awareness. Who am I? Who do I want to be? What makes me tick? And part of that is self-awareness. And self-awareness is, what are my must-haves? What are my like-to-haves? And what are my deal killers? And so for an example of this, I'm going to use a relationship. So if you took a legal pad and you put 3 columns, and on the left you had my must-haves in a relationship, what might some of those things be that you want in a relationship? I'm going to invite your input here. Anybody? Freedom, communication, respect, humor, equality, mandatory gym workouts. Absolutely. So those are your must-haves. What I had here was integrity, fun, honesty, self-awareness, self-care. That would be the gym workouts. Financial stability, okay, just as examples. Then you have your like-to-haves. These are the ones that, I'd really like it. And if they don't have it, it's not a deal killer, but it's kind of that middle ground. And so here's the list I gave for the like-to-haves. Financial success, in other words, rich, not just financial stability, but someone who's rich, yay. How about someone who's hot, hot, hot? Maybe, right? I found that having these like-to-haves, as I mature and grow older, tend to either move up to the must-have list or fall down to the deal killer list. So the older I get, the fewer I have in that middle ground. They tend to polarize like a magnet to the outer edges. Then we have our deal killers. What are your deal killers? Like you go on a date and you find out this about person. Nope. Done. Pardon me? Smoking, drinking, narcissism, lack of compassion, being in debt. Is that it? Okay, yeah. Lack of financial security. Lack of compassion. Those are our deal killers, right? We see that and we're like, nope, out of here. Now, when you were 18, were those your deal killers? Maybe, but most likely not, right? We learn that as we grow, as we integrate, as we heal our wounds, we're like, yep, nope, that moves up there, that moves down there. Oh, I didn't even know that was a deal killer, but now I dated that person and whoosh, you're out of there. Or I date this person and say, oh, I really liked that. And so that goes on my must-have list. So deal killers that I had written down were things like, the basic things. Abusive, doesn't love dogs, doesn't like to travel, messy, no sense of humor, inability to commit, lack of financial security, blah, 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 blah. But the point is, doing the work of self-identity of these components in this way in a relationship gives you some self-awareness, right? You can do the same must-have, like-to-have, and deal killer for different components of your life, for a job, for a career, for where to live, for where to go on vacation. It could be for anything. It's just a way to come up with those categories as you're going through the decision-making process to get yourself to have a clear mind and begin creating our value system, which can lead to easier decision-making as we move through life. Pema Chodron asks a question to some of her students. Where do you take refuge? Refuge when things get tough, when you're scared, lonely, angry, when you feel like things are falling apart. And the answers she got from a lot of her students in the beginning surprised her. They were answers like Netflix, shopping, food, in other words, distractions, and potentially even addictions. So in her book, Welcoming the Unwelcome, she talks about the Buddhist way of taking refuge in the jewels of Buddhism. Part of this leaning into the discomfort of the challenge zone. So instead of shying away from when you have discomfort, lean into it. Allow yourself to sit with it and see what it's there to teach you. Instead of turning towards a distraction, lean into it. Welcome the unwelcome. I thought that was good advice. So, wrapping it up here, in closing, it takes effort to be present It takes effort to be in the driver's seat and to heal our core wounds, but I think it's very worth the investment. Pema Chodron asks, in this very brief time that we have on earth, we have to ask ourselves how we're going to spend our time. Will we keep increasing and strengthening our neurotic habits in our vain quest for some kind of lasting comfort and pleasure? Or will we make it a practice to step out into the learning zone, to step out onto the skinny branches, is what I would add. She states that it's terrifying how life goes by so quickly, especially the older we become. So with that, I close and say thank you